The night was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that hums in your ears when the world is asleep. The clock had already crossed midnight, but I was still awake, lying on my side, staring at the dim light seeping through the curtains. My partner, Adil, was beside me, fast asleep, his face turned to the other side of the bed. The distance between us felt larger than the space itself, a quiet reminder of how far we had drifted. That it had been months since we'd truly spoken, not just exchanged words about groceries, bills, or work, but actually talked. The warmth that once held our lives together had cooled into routine. Love was still there, perhaps, but buried beneath layers of silence neither of us tried to peel away. Unable to bear the stillness, I got up and walked to the kitchen. The house felt heavy, shadows stretching across the walls as if watching me move. I poured myself a glass of water, the cold touch grounding me for a moment. I leaned against the counter, staring at nothing, lost in thoughts of how easily love fades when it's taken for granted. That's when I heard faint footsteps behind me, soft, hesitant. That I turned, and there he was, Ferris. That he was staying with us for a few weeks, a friend of Adil's from his office who needed a place until he found his own. Quiet, polite, and always careful not to intrude. But lately, I had noticed small things, the way his eyes lingered when I spoke, the way he smiled too gently when our paths crossed. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into simple kindness. Couldn't sleep, he asked softly. His voice startled me, but it wasn't his words, it was his tone, low and almost comforting, that caught me off guard. I shook my head, trying to smile. Just couldn't. The night feels long. He nodded, stepping closer to the counter. The dim kitchen light brushed across his face, catching the curve of his jaw, the stillness in his eyes. He looked tired too, the kind of tired that doesn't come from work, but from carrying something inside. For a moment, we just stood there, two sleepless souls in the same small kitchen, surrounded by silence. That I asked if he wanted water, and he accepted with a quiet, thanks. When I handed him the glass, our fingers brushed. It was a fleeting touch, but it stayed longer than it should have. My chest tightened. I quickly turned away, pretending to check the stove, pretending I didn't feel that pulse of electricity run through me. He leaned against the opposite counter. "You and Adil seem distant lately," he said gently, almost apologetically. The question caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say. I forced a smile and replied, "We've just been busy." But we both knew it was a lie. He didn't press further. Instead, he looked down, tracing the rim of the glass with his finger. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "people can be close in space but miles apart in feeling." His words lingered in the air like something forbidden. That I wanted to tell him he was right, that I understood every word of it, but that would mean admitting something I wasn't ready to face. So I stayed silent. The refrigerator hummed in the background. The clock ticked. And in that small kitchen, something unspoken began to form, fragile, dangerous, real. That I glanced at him once more. There was something in his eyes, a reflection of my own loneliness, my own longing to be seen, to be understood. That he took a sip of water, set the glass down, and smiled faintly. "Good night," he said, turning to leave, but just as he reached the doorway, he stopped, turned back slightly, and looked at me again. There was hesitation in his eyes, as if he wanted to say more but didn't trust himself to. Our eyes met, for just a second longer than they should have, then he left. That I stood there, frozen, feeling the echo of his presence behind me. I couldn't name the emotion that stirred within me, guilt, maybe, or curiosity, or the aching hunger for connection. Whatever it was, it refused to fade even after I returned to bed. Adil was still asleep, his breathing steady, his back turned to me. I watched the shadows dance on the ceiling and thought of the quiet moment in the kitchen, the warmth in someone else's eyes that shouldn't have felt comforting, and as I finally closed my eyes, one thought whispered through my mind, soft but persistent. The next morning felt unusually heavy. Sunlight spilled across the living room, but it couldn't chase away the memory of last night. Every detail replayed in my mind, the sound of his footsteps, the tone of his voice, the way our eyes met before he walked away. I told myself it meant nothing, that it was just an awkward moment between two tired people. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. For the next few days, I tried to avoid him. I'd wait until he left for work before coming out of the room, or stay busy when he was around. Yet, somehow, our paths kept crossing, in the kitchen, the hallway, even the small balcony where he liked to sit at night with a cup of tea. Each time, there was a quiet exchange of glances, brief but loaded with everything we weren't saying. Adil didn't notice. He was always on his phone, replying to work emails late into the night, his laughter reserved for colleagues on video calls. I wanted to resent him, but instead, I found myself resenting my own emptiness. I had become invisible in my own home, until Ferris looked at me. That night, sleep evaded me again. The same restlessness returned, pulling me out of bed and toward the kitchen. The house was still, wrapped in darkness. As I opened the fridge to pour water, I felt it again, the sense that I wasn't alone. When I turned, he was there, standing quietly, watching me. "You too?" he asked softly. "Can't sleep?" I nodded. "It's becoming a habit." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not sleep we're missing. Maybe it's something else." His words hung in the air, fragile yet dangerous. I looked at him, the dim light casting shadows across his face. There was something in his eyes that made my pulse quicken, not desire, exactly, but a kind of understanding, an empathy that felt almost intimate. That we stood there, both unsure what to say next. Then he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything. I can see it, the silence between you two." I swallowed hard. "It's complicated." He took a slow step forward. "It always is." I wanted to move away, to change the subject, to pretend this wasn't happening, but my body refused to listen. I wasn't used to someone seeing through me so easily. "Ferris," I said quietly, "this isn't right." He nodded. "I know." But he didn't step back. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The air between us grew heavier, thick with things neither of us could voice. My heart raced, not out of fear, but recognition. In his eyes, I saw my own loneliness staring back at me. He reached for the glass on the counter, his fingers brushing mine again. That same spark, that quiet, electric jolt, returned, stronger this time. That I wanted to tell him to stop, but my voice betrayed me. Instead, I whispered, "We should go back to sleep." He nodded again, but his gaze didn't waver. "Do you ever feel," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "like you're living next to someone, not with them?" I looked at him, and without meaning to, I answered, "Every day." That truth slipped out like a confession, one I couldn't take back. The silence that followed was louder than any sound. That he exhaled slowly, stepped closer, just close enough for me to feel his breath. It wasn't a move of lust, it was need, raw, quiet, human need. For a moment, time stood still. No words. No rules. Just two people standing too close in a dimly lit kitchen, bound by what they both lacked elsewhere. But before anything could go further, he turned away, his voice barely a whisper. "Good night, before we both make a mistake we can't undo." And just like that, he left. That I stood there, heart pounding, torn between guilt and relief. The clock ticked louder now, as if reminding me of every second I stood still. I turned off the kitchen light and leaned against the counter, eyes closed. That he had done the right thing by walking away. But the truth was, something had already changed, something neither of us could unfeel. As I returned to bed, Adil stirred but didn't wake. His hand rested inches away from mine, close enough to touch, yet impossibly far. I stared into the darkness, my mind replaying Ferris's words. Morning came softly, with pale light spilling across the curtains and the faint noise of Adil moving around the kitchen. For a moment, I forgot everything. Then memory returned, quiet, heavy, and real. That I lay still, staring at the ceiling. The air felt thick, as if last night's silence had followed me into the day. When I finally stepped out of the bedroom, Ferris was already dressed, seated at the table, scrolling through his phone. He looked up briefly and smiled, polite, controlled, distant. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, nothing more. No trace of what almost happened. No mention of the way we had stood too close, how our voices had trembled in the dark. It was as if both of us had agreed, silently, to bury it where it belonged, deep inside the night. Adil joined us soon after, cheerful and unaware. He poured coffee, cracked a joke about how quiet we both looked, and I forced a laugh. The sound felt strange in my throat, like it didn't belong to me anymore. Ferris didn't look up. He stirred his coffee slowly, eyes fixed on the table. The day passed in fragments. Adil went out for work meetings, and I pretended to read while Ferris packed his things in the guest room. He had found an apartment, he said. He'd be moving out that evening. His voice was calm, but his hands trembled as he folded his clothes. That I wanted to help, to say something, anything, but words refused to come. Every sentence I imagined felt too small for what I was feeling, too clumsy for the quiet ache that sat between us. When the sun began to set, he came to the doorway, bag over his shoulder. Adil was still out. The house was silent again, just like that night. I didn't mean to make things complicated, he said softly. You didn't, I lied. You just made me remember something I'd forgotten. He gave a small, sad smile. What's that? That I can still feel. He looked at me for a long moment, eyes searching mine, not with longing, but understanding. Then he reached into his pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. Don't read it now, he said. Just, later. I nodded, unable to speak. He gave one last look, the kind that says everything words cannot, and left. The sound of the door closing felt final, like the end of something fragile and unnamed. That night, I sat at the kitchen table alone, staring at the paper he'd left. After a long time, I unfolded it. His handwriting was neat, almost careful. Sometimes, we meet people not to love them, but to remind ourselves that we're still capable of love. Don't carry guilt, carry awareness. You deserve to be seen. Goodbye. I read it again and again, each line echoing in the empty kitchen. My chest ached, not from loss, but from realization. He hadn't really taken anything from me, he had simply held up a mirror. When Adil came home, I didn't mention the letter. We had dinner in silence, as usual. But that night, as he turned away to sleep, I reached out and touched his shoulder. He turned, surprised. For the first time in a long time, our eyes met, uncertain, searching. Human. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't healing. But it was something. After he drifted off, I went back to the kitchen. The light flickered, just like it always did. The same place, the same silence, but this time, it felt different. That I stood where Ferris once had, ran my fingers along the counter, and whispered into the stillness, "Thank you. For seeing me. For reminding me that numbness is not peace." Then, quietly, I turned off the light. As I walked back to the bedroom, the darkness didn't feel as heavy anymore. The loneliness was still there, but so was awareness, and that was enough for now.